So what the heck is happening in Richmound, Saskatchewan? Well, that's a question many people have been asking since a far-right conspiracy theorist and her supporters set up shop in the village's former school nearly a month ago. Richmound is located 83 kilometers northwest of Maple Creek, near the Alberta border. Last week, CBC reporter Sam Sampson visited the community and she filed this report.
In the village of Richmound, Saskatchewan, play has been replaced by patrol, an old school building now occupied by a group of conspiracy theorists. While that group's leader works inside, the 118 people who live here worry outside.
It got everybody on their toes, and it's been sort of like people are just staying in their houses more. And I did talk to a younger kid, whatever, the other day, and I said, "What do you think of these people here?" And he said, "Oh man, that's scary. I'll never go there."
The woman inside the school is Romana Didulo. She says she's the Queen of Canada, and her followers believe it. This small group closest to her, and the tens of thousands online who get her messages, or as she calls them, decrees. They vary from not paying taxes to encouraging violence against those who give out COVID vaccines.
You go home!
After being driven out of Sask, Saskatchewan last month, residents say Didulo's convoy arrived in Richmound the following day, setting up in the school after the local who owns it sent out an invite.
Hi, Rick. We're just hoping to speak with someone who's staying.
He and other members of the group didn't respond to our requests for interviews. They also ignored Richmound's protest.
The people we've spoken with who live here in Richmound don't want to publicly share their opinions because they fear they'll get individual threats like others have. But there is a lot of intimidation and feelings of anxiety.
On Sunday, Didulo's group sent out threatening letters to locals and authorities, suggesting whoever gets in the group's way or doesn't abide by its beliefs will face public execution. The community asked the province for help, but it deferred to the RCMP.
We're taking these issues with the most seriousness and making sure that we're able to maintain some freedom of association, some freedom of speech.
What does happen if something does happen to a kid, and then everybody says, "Oh, maybe we should have did something," and that's too late then.
The mayor says the school doesn't have heat. Online, Didulo's followers say they're stocking up on socks and mitts, preparing for a prairie winter. Sam Sampson, CBC News, Richmound, Saskatchewan.
Well, since then, police have set up a mobile detachment in the community, and on Tuesday they hosted a town hall meeting with residents who have concerns about their safety and the impact this is having on their community. We're going to hear more from the RCMP in just a moment, but we'd like to hear from you today. If you live in Richmound or Sask, how did you feel when the self-proclaimed Queen of Canada rolled into your town? We know a lot of you have safety concerns, so rest assured, we'll only use a first name on air, or if you call, or if you email, we'll just use a first name. Well, Tyler Bates is Chief Superintendent of the RCMP. He's District Commander for the RCMP F Division South. And he spoke with the CBC reporter Dane Patterson yesterday after the town hall.
Certainly there's a police operation with supports in place to conduct the necessary investigative efforts. But at this juncture, there's no imminent threat that exists. There are criminal matters, criminal complaints that have been made that continue to be the subject of investigation that are progressing. But outside of that, the reason for our presence here, the reason for our mobile detachment, is to provide the necessary workspace for the members to do that work, right? So that's ongoing. It was just timely and necessary with the escalated tensions in the community to really have the opportunity for citizens to ask questions and hopefully be self-assured that the efforts that need to be undertaken with respect to their concerns is taking place.
Kind of what led to the mobile detachment being sent out if there isn't that imminent threat?
Lots of angst, lots of anxiety with respect to the Didulo group. So certainly the emotional climate in the community was escalating. Just in terms of opposition to the presence of this particular group, we felt it necessary to be on site to prevent any possible criminality that might arise because of those escalated tensions that are present. And we learned very soon after our arrival, after our mobile detachment was set up, that we were accurate in that assessment, because we're now investigating an assault that transpired between parties within the community that is associated to this particular issue and the tension that exists in the community at present. So our presence, our immediacy allows us to have a very efficient response and deal with matters while they're small in scope, and make sure that there's no escalation of violence, no escalation of criminality that takes place.
Do you know how long that mobile detachment and that increased police presence is expected to be in Richmound?
I can't comment specifically on what that timeline would be. It really depends on a number of factors at the end of the day. So, as I mentioned, we want to see a de-escalation of emotion and some progress as it relates to the emotional climate in the community. We also want to see some finality, some conclusion to the investigations that are ongoing.
The QAnon group had called for his public executions. Are any charges being considered in far as that?
Yeah, so when we mention that there are threats that are the subject of ongoing investigation, that's specifically what I'm referring to. The threats that I refer to are pretty public in nature. I mean, certainly they've been out there within the cyber world, and there's a familiarity with some of the statements that have been made that are alarming and concerning to residents as well as to ourselves. Those that particular narrative, there's a complex investigation that is ongoing with respect to those threats, and I don't have anything other to say than all the necessary supports are in place to undertake that investigative process.
And on Saturday, as I understand it, there's supposed to be a meet and greet that the group has opened up to residents to kind of let them know what their movement is about. How is the RCMP preparing for that?
We're familiar with respect to the open house that is planned, and we'll ensure that we have the adequate supports in place to manage that particular event.
And with all this in mind, how concerned is the RCMP, given, as you mentioned, the public threats, the alleged assault, things like that? How concerned is the RCMP with the current situation?
We can see the emotion within the community. We can see that there is, an emotionally charged atmosphere where there's opposing perspectives and views, and certainly we are mindful of that and take that situation with all seriousness, because whenever you have opposing perspectives and factions, that escalate into threats and violence, there's always the possibility of escalation of criminality. So certainly we're taking that seriously, and we're mindful of making sure that we do all that we can to de-escalate matters and return the community of Richmound to a place of peace and tranquility and civility.
That was RCMP Chief Superintendent Tyler Bates. He is in charge of the RCMP F Division South. So what do you make of what's happening in Richmound? Why do you think this far-right conspiracy theorist has targeted rural Saskatchewan? Remember, first they rolled into Kamsack, where they were summarily chased out of town, and then they arrived in Richmound, where they've been holed up for nearly a month. Why do you think people are so eager, or some people, that is, are so eager to follow a leader like Ramona Didulo? To help us better understand the self-proclaimed Queen of Canada and the people who follow her, we're joined by Christine Sarteschi. She is a professor of social work and criminology at Chatham University in Pittsburgh. She's been following the so-called Queen of Canada and her movement for years, including recent trips to Saskatchewan, and she's on the line now. Professor Sarteschi, thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me.
First off, you're in Pittsburgh. How did Ramona Didulo first get on your radar?
Oh, well, I've been studying extremism for some time, and I came across her about 2 years ago, and she was a really unusual figure who was, making a big splash, I guess, if you will, during the pandemic. And she was growing in number of followers. I think at her height, she got to about 80,000. And I was also interested in her from the perspective of she was, what she talked about was so bizarre and ludicrous, yet she seemed to believe it with such sincerity. And so I needed to know more about what this movement was all about.
Well, who is she?
She's a woman who actually was originally from the Philippines and moved to Canada when she was about 15 years old after she lost her parents, and then lived here ever since. Best we could tell, she, as an adult, worked in human resources and tried to start a number of businesses, which didn't seem to succeed. So we're not quite clear how she went from human resources into this newer, conspiracy type of work that she's doing now. But at some point in around like 2020, she tried to start a political party, and that didn't really seem to go anywhere. And then soon thereafter, she blossomed into this conspiracy theorist, and then grew in popularity with those ideas.
Well, how did she gain a following? I think you mentioned a figure of as high as 80,000 at one point. How did she do that?
I think it was during the height of the pandemic, and she mostly, talks to her followers on Telegram, so a social media platform. And a lot of people, I think, or at least a subset of people, were really interested in what she was saying about the vaccine. She was really targeting individuals who were giving vaccines, healthcare workers, anyone who was involved in healthcare. She was really upset about the pandemic, all the things that were being put in place by the government. So I know we had a contingent of people who really were upset about, mask mandates and vaccines and so forth. So I think that resonated with some people, and I think that helped increase her popularity at that time.
Well, beyond the anti-vax stance, what is the attraction that people have to her? And I think you used the term bizarre beliefs.
Yeah.
What's the attraction?
Well, I think that, she's an interesting figure in the sense that she is making promises to people, I mean, of which she can't keep, of course, but if you believe in her and her ideas, and then maybe you donate here and there to her cause, then you would get so many things. You don't have to pay your car note, you don't have to pay taxes, no more mortgages. You can actually, be part of this program she was promising called med beds, where if you got ill, you would be cured. She could cure cancer. She's promising all this money through something she calls the quantum financial system, which is a conspiracy theory based on the idea that all this money is going to be coming to people soon. You no longer have to send your kids to school anymore. You can homeschool them. And if you believe in Romana Didulo, then she'll even pay you $5,000 to do this. So there's a lot that she offers to people that people apparently want.
Got an email here from Sue. It's a pretty good question. How does Didulo not meet the criteria of the Mental Health Act? That comes from a long-time retired mental health practitioner.
Well, I live in the United States, and if Canada is anything like the U.S., the way the mental health system operates is that you typically have to be an imminent threat to yourself or to others. And because she doesn't meet that criteria of being imminently dangerous of self to others, my guess is that she would not meet the criteria for hospitalization.
Okay, we have a caller, Clement Saskatoon, who coincidentally is going to ask my next question. Hi, Clem.
I just got myself straightened out here. Hi, Garth. This and hi, your guest. This woman reminds me of a thing that was going around a few years ago, where someone could say, "I'm a free man on the land," and they would get to live in whatever property they were surrounded by. And they wouldn't have to pay taxes, and they would essentially become a little kingdom. So that reminds me of that. I also think that in a democracy like Canada, we have to stand up to our rights. And if this person's treading on those rights or committing criminal acts like threatening to execute people, they have to be dealt with in a very firmly in a criminal way. That's my comment. Thanks.
Right. Thanks, Clem. Okay, listeners, again, we're talking about I'm going to call it the occupation of Richmound, Saskatchewan. The self-proclaimed Queen of Canada, Ramona Didulo, has basically, they've taken over an old school in the community. They've been there for about a month. It's causing a lot of anxiety in the community. It's prompted the RCMP to set up a temporary detachment in the village. We'd like to hear from you today, folks. Why do you think she and her followers have been targeting rural Saskatchewan? How do you think groups or cults like this should be dealt with? Do you think, in your opinion, have they already broken the law by issuing death threats? Let's talk a little bit about Clem's question. What is the link, or is there a link, between the sovereign citizen movement and what we hear from Didulo and her followers?
I think that's a great question, and he was a really great observation he had. And she is a person who believes in many ideas. I mean, sometimes as researchers, we're asked to categorize, and I definitely think she endorses some of the sovereign citizen ideas. I hear that. I listen to their nightly quote unquote news shows, and they more and more talk about sovereign citizen ideas. He mentioned, freemen on the land, which is a term that is often used to describe sovereigns in Canada. So they talk about writing contracts or signing their names in certain colors, that their name has to be written in small letters as opposed to capital letters. So she absolutely does endorse sovereign citizen ideas. So I would put her in that category along with QAnon, anti-vaxxer, even potentially seditionist. I mean, because if it were up to her, she would, eliminate the government of Canada and install herself. And in her mind, that's effectively what she's done and is trying to do more broadly. If it was up to her, all Canadians would be under her rule.
Let's talk a little bit more about the sovereign citizen movement, because it seems to be kind of at the root of Didulo and her followers and their beliefs. Where did that get started? How did it gain traction? What do they believe?
They basically believe that they are not beholden to the laws of respective countries, and that if they do a certain amount of paperwork or a certain type of paperwork, then they will not. They could then, quote unquote, live in the private or basically do what they want and not be, held to account like any other person in society, law-abiding person in society. Of course, none of that is true. They've been around for quite a long time, I'd say, in some form or another, since the 1950s. And over time, we've seen, different eras in which we see more of them. And I definitely think this is one of those eras where we're seeing more of them. And some people believe that it's related to the pandemic that we saw rise in these groups. And it's with the internet, it's just so easy to pass this information along to people, and a lot of people learn about it on social media, and they aren't really an organized group. There are gurus here and there, but there's so much information available that people could download something and then take it to court and present it there. So it's just the information is so easily accessible. And it's important to note that none of these claims have ever worked in a court of law, not in any country that I'm aware of. I've tracked at least 31 countries in which we've seen activity, but despite it not being effective, it's still really an interest to some people, which is an interesting phenomenon.
Okay, we have a caller on the line. We're going to say Lily, who is in Richmound and has called in. Lily, thank you so much for calling in. And
thanks for having me.
What's the mood like in Richmound these days?
There's a lot of anger, there's a lot of tension, and people aren't very happy right now.
What have you seen?
We also
what have you seen in the last couple of months?
I mean, this group showed up, and as soon as you kind of know who the group claims to be, you start doing a deep dive into their realm, trying to figure out what they're all about, and the deeper you go, the scarier it gets. And today we've received another cease and desist with a lot more names on it, noting that if we don't comply to whatever they say in this order, that public executions are going to happen.
Are you scared, Lily?
I don't know. It's tough to say, like we haven't seen any violence from the group, and in the past, I mean, the RCMP also tell us that there's no imminent threat, but there's young children in the community, and it's very uneasy to have a group who is saying, if you don't do this, we're going to publicly execute you and we will bring harm to your children. And that is scary. Yeah, it is scary.
What are they telling you to do? Or not to do, I guess.
The list is a little ridiculous. I mean, I could read the whole thing, but I think it would bore your listeners.
No, we're curious, Lily. Let's hear it. We're curious about just exactly what they're saying.
So we, the people, men and women of the Kingdom of Canada, bring to your attention and order you to cease and desist all hateful propaganda and crimes against humanity under natural law, common law, treaty law, Articles 6 and 7 of the International Criminal Court Statute, the Nuremberg Code, the Geneva Convention, the United Nations Convention, the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and the jurisdiction of Kingdom of Canada. It's clear that you violated federal, international, and constitutional laws. Here are the articles of law that render all man and lady of the nation victims of our government and their collaborators, allowing the opening of a criminal investigation as well as a financial compensation to be determined. Extortion, intimidation, uttering threats, assaults, hateful propaganda, public hate incitement. It goes on and on. What they really don't like is, unlawful creation of digital media, promotional videos, podcasts, websites. Like, they don't like that there's media out about them, and they think that it's all lies. And these acts carry the death penalty. They think that we're qualified under domestic terrorism and treason. Like, it's literally four Word document pages long.
Wow.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
Well, how's it affecting everyday life in the community? I mean, are people going to stores, or are they going to, there's probably a cafe. What's this done to the community?
There's one small store in town.
Pardon me?
There's one small store, and there's only one small store in town. So, I mean, that's the only place to get your mail. And so if you want to get your mail, you got to go. I think I've noticed, that people are staying to themselves a lot more. I know I have been. Just trying to keep my children close.
They're going to have an open house on Saturday. What do you expect is going to happen there?
I don't want to know what's going to happen. It's that part is scary. You don't know who's going to come to town, and yeah.
How are you explaining this to your children, Lily? I don't know how old they are, but how do you explain what's going on?
I mean, at first it's, there's some people in town who we don't know who they are, and we just want you to stay away from that area in town and stay close to home and let us know where you are at all times, that kind of thing. So not to try and scare them, and it's tough. They're just kids, you don't want to take away all their freedoms and their walks and their bike rides, but you do want them to be safe. And that's one of the reasons you move to a small town. Small communities are great for raising children, and they can be free, but this just doesn't feel the same.
Are you feeling any better that there's a police presence in the community now?
Absolutely. That is very appreciated by the community. Mm-hmm.
What would you like to see happen next, Lily?
I mean, I'd really like to see these people leave. At the same time, I don't want to see another community have to deal with this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I really don't.
Right.
It's not fun. It's not fair. Like, who starts putting cease and desist orders and execution lists out? How is that a thing that can happen and no charges can be laid?
Right.
Doesn't
Lily,
make sense.
is there anything you wanted to add?
I mean, if anybody wants to come and support the community of Richmond, there is a protest planned again this weekend, and we'd really appreciate anybody's help.
Right.
And prayers. If you pray, just pray for us.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit more about the protest this weekend.
Oh, it's taking place both days. On Saturday and Sunday, starting at noon. And if you want to, we're asking that people don't trespass, stay lawful, stay peaceful, bring some signs that do not include any hate propaganda. We don't want that, and bring some noise, bring a voice to let this group know that they're not welcome. And this is the country of Canada.
Right. Again, Lily, thank you so much for calling, and thanks for the conversation, and thanks. Well, just thanks. Thanks generally.
Thanks for bringing this to light.
Being with us.
Thank you. Bye.
Just a quick note, CBC has tried to talk to Didulo, and no one from the group would speak to us. Well, Professor, what do you think when you hear somebody like Lily who is so directly affected by a group like this?
I mean, I think it speaks directly to the problems with having a group like this in existence. It was really interesting to hear her say, I'd like them to leave, but I also don't want to see this in any other town. I mean, such empathy she has. I feel bad for her and her children. The fact that she said that they received yet another cease and desist letter, that actually might be a new thing, because to the best of my knowledge, that the first one was received on Sunday, and it sounds like potentially that more are being sent out. And I know the group is really upset about all the media coverage, and so they have been complaining about that every night. And so it just makes me wonder: are they back doing it again? Which is a little surprising in some ways, given all the focus.
Okay, I'm going to bring a couple of callers into the conversation. Wayne is in Swift Current. Hi, Wayne.
Yeah, hi, Garth. I think you asked a question about what this offers to people, and I've done, over the last 35 years, I've done a number of sessions with former cult members, and this is looking to be much like a cult. We have a self-professed guru, and why is that attractive to, in some cases it was mentioned here, 80,000 people at one time, is that this type of environment offers safety, hope, a sense of purpose, belonging, and that's fine, but when does it cross into the leader being more of a dictator? And we've had a long history over the years of these sorts of things where the dictator becomes in complete control, and if not, you as a follower you're going to have a negative experience. So I'd be interested in knowing, what sort of power and control she has over her flock. I'd be very interested in hearing about that from, members or maybe former members. But I do think at the end of the day, this is something that needs to be taken very serious by law enforcement and the legal profession, because this could go south quickly in the dark of night. And I think that it's a very good thing that the RCMP are there, and that the media, like CBC, is covering this, because this has the potential, in my experience, to go south and become less than favorable for both sides.
Yeah.
That's what I have, Garth.
All right. Thanks, Wayne. Christine, any thoughts?
I I think those observations are very astute. And I think that from what we've heard about the people who have left, there are several ex-followers that were willing to speak, and I think there's more who we haven't heard from. But they talk about having been threatened with death, threatened to be executed by taking someone over in a helicopter and dropping them into a volcano of alligators, a lot of insistence on devotion to the Queen, uh, telling they didn't really have any freedom, that she was very specific about what they had to do all day long, and they couldn't even walk like even a short distance away from where they were located without telling her. They were required to do chores all day long, wait on her hand and foot. So his observations are really right on in terms of it potentially being a cult and her being sort of dictatorial. I've described her in the exact same way.
Well, then, I suppose a general question then, uh, based on your research, does this fit the criteria of a cult?
I think so. They don't tend to be as religious as traditional cults, but they do. She does demand devotion, and she is the queen bee, and everything she says goes. And so, to me, I think they meet the criteria.
Just a note, listeners, if you're curious about digging a little deeper into this, there's a really interesting podcast by CBC Frontburner that has an episode where they spoke to a Vice reporter who has spoken to several of Didulo's former followers, and you can find that on the CBC Listen app. Let's hear from Maria in Swift Current. Hi, Maria.
Hey, I think one of the roadblocks to peace in this world is self-righteousness. And, I think when we see extreme movements, I don't feel like they come out of nowhere. Right now we're in a system that's clearly failing people. It kind of pits people against each other in this world, and we're seeing a lot of ramifications in mental health and addiction and whatnot. And, so if I just feel like there needs to be a little more humility here and understanding about how our current conditions and our current system is breeding, maybe more toxic behaviors or extreme movements, and how can we kind of reconcile, our broken communities in a way where people don't feel the need to resort to stuff like this, I guess.
All right, Maria, thanks. Thanks for the call. Now, Didulo has declared herself Queen of Canada, among other titles. What do you think that means to her followers, Christine?
That she's all powerful, and I think she sees herself in that way, that what she says goes, and you better listen to her. And that, the way they talk about her is that she is sent from the heavens, essentially, to, and she has said herself that it's her sole contract to do this work, and that, she's talked about being, thousands of years old. She's had all these bizarre connections with people of historical past. She tells very strange stories about how she came from ancient royal families and her bloodline is very special and royal. None of these things have ever been proven to be true. And in fact, some of the research I've done has shown that none of these things could even possibly be true. So she's an all-powerful person to these individuals, to the followers.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's what puzzles me, and I think many listening is, some of her claims are so bizarre. They're just so out there that you wonder how any even semi-rational person could buy into them.
I think that all the time, but I see people, just having read so much of the forum postings and to see the rationalizations that some people have about her, they can take the wildest, most ridiculous piece of quote unquote evidence that she puts out there and make sense out of it. They actually will kind of make up stories to go along with something she says. So they are rationalizing their beliefs along with her. She makes wild claims. For instance, she would say that she gave $1.5 million in aid to end homelessness. And what her followers will do is they will find stories in the news about, a different politician who helped assist in homelessness in a certain province, and they will say, oh, wow, they're taking credit for Queen Romana's ideas. And so to them, they're saying these things are coming true that she's saying. So they kind of talk themselves into believing in her.
I want to take a minute to talk about victims here because, obviously, most reasonable people would consider the people of Richmound right now to be victims. But I want to talk about that pool of desperate people who have had their utilities shut off, they've lost their vehicles and homes, people suffering as a result of her edicts and believing what she says. At some point, it must dawn on them that they've been misled, or does it?
Well, sometimes I think people leave the movement and we may never hear from them. But there are people who have had those things happen to them and they still stay in the movement. And it's really hard to fully understand how they rationalize that. I know of a couple people in particular who have been, it's in situations where the bailiff was there at their house making them leave, and they're leaving with practically nothing, and they're begging for help to their queen and completely ignores every posting they have. But yet they are still on the forums. They are still posting. They're still talking about how much they love their queen. It's hard to reconcile how those two things work. But there certainly are people who still believe in her despite all that they've lost.
All right, folks, if you've joined us recently, our conversation today is, well, I'm calling it the occupation of Richmound, Saskatchewan. And as you have been hearing on the news, the Queen of Canada, or the QAnon Queen, Ramona Didulo, has arrived in Saskatchewan. And you remember she was pretty much chased out of town when they tried to set up shop in Kamsack. So they went all the way across the province to the village of Richmound on the Alberta border, where they have settled into an abandoned school, which is on private property and to which the owner has issued an invitation. So obviously it's causing a lot of angst amongst people in Richmound. But at one point, this woman had 80,000 followers. What do you think attracts people to a cult like this? Why do you think the cult is attracted to rural Saskatchewan? And what would you do if you lived in Richmond? Got this email from Gerald who writes, Saskatchewan in general, rural a bit more, would be prime ground for this group. The trucker rally, anti-vaccine groups, freedom types who believe laws don't apply to them. Obviously, this group, by uttering death threats, has already broken some laws, private property or not. And that came to us from Gerald. And let's speak to James in Humboldt. Hi, James.
Hi. Yeah, I just wanted to say we're giving too much power to these guys. They're a joke. There's 12 people to the group, for God's sakes. The Queen of Canada. Well, I, James Baron of Bird, declare, that these people are a joke. Like, really?
Yeah.
Prove me wrong.
What would you do if they rolled into Anaheim?
If they rolled into my asphalt, I don't want to say anything because I don't want to have to put up with this crap. But listen, there's more people that work at the local egg dealership. Anyone, pick one. Like, come on, you guys. They're on private property. You know what? There's no food, power, and water. November could be cold. I'm just saying. They got nothing. Like, as long as the RCMP know that they don't have any guns or anything like that, like, come on. Like, the fact that this made local news, like, this is basically a bunch of yahoos on a camping trip, and when they run out of funds, they're out of funds, guys.
All right, James, thanks for your thoughts. Thanks for sharing that.
Thank you.
Christine, maybe, is James onto something? Are we all taking this too seriously? Should we just be ignoring it?
I don't think we should ignore the reality of what they're doing. I mean, they're making themselves known by sending out all these letters to people, threatening people. I don't think we can ignore that. We don't know what they're about. We don't know what their intentions are. They're a group that espouses really ridiculous things. If it were up to them, they'd overthrow the government. I don't think we should ignore that. They are doing it. So, we should report on it.
Now, some refer to Didulo as the QAnon Queen, and I'd like to talk a little bit about that because there is a link. A lot of people have heard the word QAnon, but don't really know what it means or what they stand for. Can you explain what QAnon is
Yeah,
in a few minutes?
Yeah, I would say that, the basic idea with QAnon is the belief that there are politicians who are involved in underground sex trafficking for the purpose of utilizing, basically drinking their blood to get some benefit to live a longer life, something to that effect. But there's never been any proof of any of these things being true. I mean, there's been high profile incidents where people believe there's tunnels under restaurants and have gone there to check and found out that's absolutely not true. So yeah, Didulo does believe in some of those ideas, and one of her main stories she tells is that there were tunnels underground Canada, and that the CCP were utilizing the underground tunnels to traffic children from Canada to United States to Mexico. And she herself personally put an end to that and stopped that. And that we should be thanking her, because had she not done that, then we would have been in World War III. It's a really bizarre story, but she definitely believes in those ideas.
Oh. How does she communicate with her followers? Can you help us understand Telegram? What is it, and why it's so popular with the fringe right, and how many people use it?
I don't know. I don't know, like in totality, how many people use it, but it's very popular among people who have been kicked off some of the more mainstream platforms, like Twitter and Facebook. And so I think that Telegram tolerates more of a lot of the stuff that conspiracy theorists post up there. I know that, like, for instance, her followers will say, I tried to post this message on Facebook and it got deleted, or I got in trouble. So it seems like Telegram is this app where it's basically like a forum with a bunch of message boards. And so anyone can join any of the groups. And Didulo has a main Telegram channel where she speaks and just posts messages or does live videos, which they post on Telegram every day. She does this, multiple times a day. And then there are probably another, I'd say, 20 channels that are hers or that her followers have started, in which they post things. So sometimes they're specific to, like, there's a group, for instance, of people who her followers who serve cease and desist orders, and you can go to this group and you can post like who you sent it to or who you served it to, that kind of thing. But the main, there's like 3 or 4 main active channels, and there's thousands of people on them.
Where was she before she came to Saskatchewan?
She was, I don't know. I mean, they had been traveling around to different locations for some time. They were at someone else's house before Kamsack for a while, and I can't remember exactly the location at this time. But they were there for a couple weeks. Someone else's property, who a follower of hers let them stay there. And that's kind of been what they've been doing lately, where they're at people's, private property or someone else's house that has a lot of land, and then they bring their RV and other vehicles and just kind of live there. Before that, they had just been spending time traveling around Canada, and they would hold meet and greets in like Walmart parking lots. That's the kind of thing they would do.
Yeah. I wonder why, as you know, they tried to set up shop in the town of Kamsack. They were greeted by a couple hundred protesters who made it pretty clear they were not welcome, and they moved on. What's the difference between that and the folks in Richmond having a protest and their decision to stay anyway?
I think it might have been that they may not have had anywhere to stay, possibly. It seemed like they rolled into town. They made some statements about, their right to be there and the desire to take over the town, something to that effect. And the town was like, no, you're leaving. I mean, they just were very, strong, and they had a big group of people who were, in the town with signs. I think that they just may not have had anywhere to stay. They may have been trying to find a place to stay, and they just didn't. And they figured, well, hey, nobody wants us here. This is a problem. We have nowhere to stay, is my sense of what may have happened there.
Yeah. Now, as we've discussed, the Didulo and her group make public threats, including public executions against townspeople, community leaders, local media. Is this the first time the group has made these kind of threats, or is that part of their modus operandi?
Yeah, the latter. Threatening is what they do. This is why they're not a benevolent or they're not a harm. They are a group that can potentially cause harm to people. So they're not harmless. And they have been threatening people in one way or another for a long time. I mean, it's just part of what they do, which I think is the thing that I think makes people so concerned about them, because we don't know exactly what their goal is, what their intentions are, and they're constantly threatening people. And it isn't just like minor things. They're talking about, lengthy talks about public executions and how they're going to hang people for things that are not crimes, but to them, they're crimes. They don't like them, and so they want to execute people. I know that in 2021, she was detained for making a more direct threat to healthcare workers, a shoot to kill kind of threat. But in that instance, she was detained for a time, went to a psych hospital, and then was let go. So we don't really know what happened because we don't have those details, I guess, due to, public records or private healthcare records and so forth. But after that, she didn't explicitly threaten, but then over time she's gone back to that. That's just her style.
Well, before we run out of time, we've only got a few minutes left, but I'm just curious, sort of at the root of this, is what are the conditions then that make cult leaders like Didulo able to find people who support them, even if they say these incredibly outlandish and unreasonable things? Like, can you... And I'm asking you to use a little conjecture here, but who would be the average follower of a group like this?
Well, in her case, it does seem like people might be maybe lower income. They don't have a lot of money, and maybe that's why the appeal of all these free things is an appeal for them. I think people who don't demand evidence, because if her followers demanded evidence of all the claims she'd make, they would then eventually realize that there is nothing to back up. Nothing she says is true. There is no Kingdom of Canada. She is not the Queen. She is not, canceled mortgages. She has not done all these things. So I think that people who would demand evidence would not follow this group.
And, Christine, when we take a step back and look at the big picture, what does this say? Here in Canada, we have Didulo, and certainly the sovereign citizens is a big deal in the States and parts of Canada. The whole QAnon conspiracy community. What does this say about the time and place we are in?
That is a great question. I mean, I always think about the fact that that there's seemingly been a movement away from science, and I think that the more we move away from science, the more we're going to have things like this crop up. One should demand evidence, especially when somebody is making outrageous claims, and I think that if we did that and we were more open to that and we were moving more towards science instead of away from it, we would see less of these types of groups. And I also think the internet plays a big role. It's very unregulated. And until that changes, we're going to have, you can have a website and say the most ridiculous things in the world, and you're going to probably find followers in the world. So until we do more regulation, I'm not sure we'll see any change in this area, unfortunately.
Yeah. At the end of the day, would we even been having this conversation if it weren't for the web?
I think not. I think it would just be so much harder for people with outrageous ideas to find other people to support those ideas.
Well, Professor Sarteschi, thanks so much for your time and sharing your expertise with us today. It's been really educational. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.